Good evening, everyone. All right. Start with the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amy, can I have a roll call, please?
Director Asner? Here. Director Byers? Here. Director Faulkner?
Here.
Director Hudson? Here. Director Moeller?
Here.
Vice President Petroff? Here. And President Cuneo?
Here. All right, we have a quorum. We have one public comment tonight, Debbie Cole. Please.
Please tell me if you cannot.
You will in just 1 second. We seem to have some feedback here. And everybody wants to hear you. And I want to make sure everyone hears what is still clearly. All right, if you would, please.
Okay. Please tell me if you cannot hear me. I'll try to project. I am here to talk to the Board of Education tonight, both as a parent of a child who went through the special education SSD system and as an employee of SSD. And what I would like to implore the Board of Education.
Sorry, we really want to give you all the attention you deserve.
Okay.
I apologize. Ms. Cole?
What it found from their research is that Down syndrome was tied to 10 times the risk of COVID-19 death and 5 times the risk of COVID hospitalization. As you know, SSD educates adults with Down syndrome, and I know you all want the safest environment for those individuals. And I think this is some pretty compelling evidence that we need a vaccine mandate. This, by the way, was done before the Delta variant became predominant in this country. The next article that I want to cite was actually posted today in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and it talks about the rising numbers of children in our children's hospital. In just 1 week, the major hospital systems across the St. Louis area have gone from having 13 children hospitalized with COVID to 20. 10 were younger than 12, and they were too young to get vaccinated. The rest were 12 to 18. 3 in the youngest age group and 4 in the oldest were in the intensive care fighting for their lives. I think that is pretty alarming. The children at Cardinal Glennon are also, the numbers are rising. the Delta variant, since the Delta variant has come into play, we are seeing double digits in the emergency department, and we have typically between 8 and 12 kids in the hospital with COVID. This is from the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Maria Strand. She goes on to state that the best thing we can do is to help these children. She said they rely on their families and their community to be vaccinated to protect them, which we have not done. If we want a safe learning environment, we need a vaccine mandate. I know that there are people in my building who are not vaccinated. The last part that I want to cite out of this article, and again, I will read them with you. There is a pediatrician, the article goes on to speak about the rising numbers in the South. And Dr. Heather Fox, who is a pediatrician at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, has said this time around, and again, she's referring to the Delta variant, this time around, I'm seeing more COVID pneumonia in younger children, now seeing it in neonates to preschoolers. I work in an early childhood program in one of the partner districts, and while we try very, very hard to keep those masks on, it is difficult with children with severe special needs who are aged 3 to 5. And vaccine mandates would give one more layer of protection for those children. Many people in my building went out and got them the minute they could, but I know that there are people in our building who have not been vaccinated. And I implore, especially with the full approval of the Pfizer vaccine on Monday, do everything we can for a safe environment for our children. Thank you.
And you will make sure, we will just tap into the articles. All right, would someone like to make an approval of tonight's agenda, please? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Superintendent's report, reopening update.
Yes, we have 4 updates tonight. The first one is going to be a reopening update. We started school on Monday, and so we're really excited to be able to update the board on what it looks like for our first 2 days of school. So we have Dr. Brooksby and Mr. Kevin Andrews and Justine Macri.
Hi, good evening. Good evening, Dr. Cuneo, Vice President of Hotshot, Board of Directors, Dr. Keenan. My name is Kelly Grigsby. I'm Executive Director for Schools and Programs. I have Kevin Andrews, Executive Director for Career and Technical Education, and Chiquita McRiddle, Executive Director for Partner Districts here tonight. We will be providing an update on reopening schools. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So staff returned on August 11th, and they've been going through a series of training, professional development, getting their classrooms ready, just being ready to prepare for students. Students returned yesterday. By all accounts, students were happy to be back at school. Staff were happy to have students back in the schools, ready to go and ready for learning. It was a good first day. It was a great start, and so far it's been rolling really well. We are providing 100% in-person learning for all students unless students require medical homebound. If a virtual option is requested, we are working with partner districts to explore best interest and determine if MOCAP is appropriate or virtual learning through the partner district. We've also have been continuing to evolve with our safe, go back. Thank you. We've also been continuing to evolve our safe return to school guidelines. Nothing has changed with those since the last time I was here. We're still requiring masks, and we're still socially distancing if possible, and have other guidelines in place. We have been working through positive cases and contact tracing. We are also managing that with coverage due to vacancies, but we are making sure that students and staff are safe. Next
We
slide.
go to the next
Sure.
slide. How many positive cases have we got so far?
I don't have that information, but I'm sure we can get that for you.
And I was just curious if we could have an ongoing number of those.
We also will be reactivating the COVID dashboard.
Yeah, we have it on our website, so I have it on our website that it tracks the cases that we have.
Thank you.
Next slide. We have returned to community-based instruction where we are able to go into businesses and to sites. BSC, we're following BSC sites and protocols, so if where vaccination requirements are required for that site, then we're requiring students and staff in that location to be vaccinated. We're providing alternative sites if that's the case. We're also providing PPE. Again, we're trying to maintain our staffing levels. We've only been in with students for 2 days, so it's not a robust report, but so far so good. Thank you.
All right. And so for our technical high schools at North Tech and South Tech, like SSD schools, we were back on August 11th. In addition to trainings, our teachers also spent a lot of time reaching out to families, especially doing individual phone calls. One thing that's been a challenge for us in the past with technical high schools is North Tech and South Tech might not start on the same day as a student's home high school. So for example, this week, Rittner starts on Wednesday, where North Tech was in session on Monday. And so typical years, our families have a lot of questions of, is my child supposed to come to school, or do they stay home until they're in session? What does that look like? And so our teachers were doing one-on-one phone calls, really emphasizing the importance of being at school on day one. Students return on August 23rd, and that paid dividends. This is one of our best attended day ones that we've had in the last several years. Many of our classrooms may have only had 1 or 2 students absent. So student attendance for day one was very, very good as a result of that one-on-one contact. It's one thing for us to send out an all-call or a letter talking about how important day one is. It's totally different to hear that from your child's teacher explaining, here's everything we're going to do on the first day. Here's stuff your child just doesn't want to miss out on. Construction impact for anybody who's been to South Tech lately. We're pretty knee-deep in construction there. The main entrance has moved. The staff for that building have done an excellent job of putting up additional signage to direct where parents enter, where families enter, where students enter, and where buses enter. It's always challenging that first day because we've got a lot of 16-year-old drivers that we're trying to get to a student parking lot, so you can imagine the joys of that. But it worked out well for day one and day two. North Tech construction finished up, and our students were extremely excited to be back in the building, especially to see that new front entrance. We now have an entrance that matches the high-quality programs in the rest of the building. So you could tell just the energy from students walking in that space because it is so much more modern and better reflects what we do at special school districts. Instructional delivery models, if you remember we talked about how juniors and seniors are all in person. We were offering a virtual option for sophomores. However, we did not have students take us up on that offer. We only had 1 request for a virtual sophomore section. We followed up with that family and kind of talked them through it, and they decided it was in the best interest for their child to stay at their home high school for this semester. They didn't want to have them in class by themselves in a virtual section by themselves. Next slide. Similar to other SSD schools, we've implemented our safe return to in-person learning guidance, and so that's in place. We were really impressed with mask compliance on the first day of school. Especially at North Tech, South Tech, we just required a few reminders, but by the time of dismissal, mask compliance was great. We're working through positive cases and contact tracing. At this point, the only positive cases we've had have been staff. Staffing levels, right now we are fully staffed at North Tech and South Tech, and now we're working on establishing work-based learning opportunities for students. So getting students out to clinical sites and our health sciences courses, as well as our other programs that have job showing and internship requirements. We're working through what PPE is required. Many of our sites are requiring students to wear N95 masks. We're also looking at virtual and in-person visits. We are running into some challenges where employers are saying they'll only allow students on site if they are vaccinated. And not all of our students are vaccinated, so that's a challenge that we're working through on a program-by-program.
I have one question.
Oh, sure.
I thought the individual calls was an excellent idea. Would you do me a favor? People have tons of that. You run the numbers of what you had this year. Compare them to an average of the past 5 years for first days attendance. I wouldn't do last year's.
Right, yeah.
Last year didn't count.
Yeah, last year was a little different.
Yeah. And then, if it looks good, which it will, could we write this up as the best practice?
Oh, absolutely.
Because, I mean,
And it's something, so we did a survey with our teachers at the end of the first day of how did day one go, and that was the recurring feedback we've heard from teachers of just, it's so great to walk into a class where I'm expecting 16 students and 15 of my 16 are there. The energy that creates
It's just contagious.
Well, I think especially since, as you were saying, you know, different schools start at different times, and there's always that confusion. I think that, this was great. I was just hoping we could use this, write this up, and if the data is appropriate, use it as a best practice.
Yep.
You know,
Absolutely.
Good evening, and I will give you an update on partner districts. Next slide. And so throughout St. Louis County, we have varying dates for returning for both staff and students. Starting at the end of July, most districts begin to return staff to schools, and students are returning this week, of course, starting this past Monday. The models for instruction, they differ from district to district. For the majority, all of them are all districts are in person. A few of those districts are offering some virtual options if needed. The number of students requesting virtual from the special ed standpoint, those numbers are minimum at this time. More information will be shared, of course, as students continue to transition back into the schools and districts this weekend. We'll be able to provide more information in that area. For the most part, those districts that are not offering a in-district virtual option, those students are taking into consideration those MOCAP options in those districts. With regards to collaborating with partner districts, we've been working with each director and conducting one-on-one meetings to have conversations just to ensure that we're planning appropriately, but also offering that technical support in the areas of teaching and learning, transportation, PPEs, that safety and security component, communicating with parents and stakeholders. We also work to ensure that we have a good understanding of those return to school plans and to ensure that those directors and field coordinators are participating in those conversations in the partner districts. We wanted to ensure that we had a clear understanding of transportation and we're supporting those needs as well too. With regards to ensuring that staff are safe, of course, our staff will comply with both SSD, and to some extent, they will also comply with those partner district expectations for maintaining safety within those school districts as it relates to our current status. And so we'll continue to work with each of those partner districts to address any positive cases that may occur and to ensure that we keep those classrooms safe to return to class. With regards to staffing levels, we have currently about 13 teacher positions for all 22 districts that are vacant, and we're continuing to work on that. Dr. Yates, the Assistant Director of Executive Director of Partner Districts, that is one of her responsibilities where she works with each director to ensure that we are focused on those vacancies. Currently, right now, we have about 183 para vacancies, and that number has decreased from the beginning of August when we were at about 250. So we're continuing to identify these individuals to come in and to become a part of our team and to support our schools.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have the SSD local compliance plan.
All right, Susan Henry is our Director of Compliance, and so she is our resident guru on everything special education legally. So she's going to update the board on the local assurance plan that we'll be adopting at the end of the
As an introduction. President Cuneo, Vice President Potroff, Board Directors, Dr. Keenan, I am Susan Henry, and I am presenting on our SSD local compliance plan and our general assurance document. I will try and break down what is kind of an unnecessarily complicated process into something simple. A little background. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act does require that states and local school districts have plans that provide some assurances that they're going to meet the conditions required to provide special education in a compliant way, in a way that's compliant with IDEA. So to that end, Missouri has what we call the Missouri State Plan for Special Education. It is our regulations and our rules for how to provide special education. For SSD, we have our SSD local plan for compliance with the state regulations. It's essentially a duplicate of the Missouri State Plan for Special Education.
In addition to our local compliance plan, we also have some additional requirements we need to meet that are outlined in the Missouri State Plan for Special Education under Regulation 15. And that only applies to special school districts and their component districts. In Missouri, that's just us and a little tiny district down in Blue Missouri. Next slide, please. So that general assurance document that we have to have in place because we are a special school district, it outlines specific portions of the state plans that apply only to us and those partner districts. It outlines issues that relate to areas of compliance that we solely are responsible for, and those issues of compliance that we have joint compliance responsibilities with the partner districts. So what we did was we asked our component districts to sign an assurance statement that they will implement what they can that they're responsible for based on what their joint compliance responsibilities are. And the assurance statement is kind of boiled down to general assurance document into one form, and a representative from the partner district signs that, and it all goes to DESI, so DESI knows entire St. Louis County is on board with this. It is strictly a compliance requirement. It's not associated with any other agreements or arrangements that we have with our partner districts. It is strictly related to special education compliance. Next slide, please. Usually, we don't have to do anything with either our local compliance plan until Missouri decides to make changes to their state plan. And some years they make them every year, and you'll see me every year up here saying this. And then every now and then we have a year or two where they don't see the need to make any kind of changes, and things are status quo. But on July 14th, 2021, DESI did roll out some changes. So this requires us to make changes to our local. Changes they made to the Missouri State Plan had to do, they really were not super substantial. They did make some changes to our eligibility determination criteria for intellectual disability. And specifically, they really beefed up the requirement that we have a score to identify a student as having significant deficits in the area of adaptive behavior. So right now, the criteria says you need to have, in short, there are a list of items you need to meet criteria for to be identified as having an intellectual disability. But in short, your cognitive ability score needs to be a 70 or below, and you need to have adaptive behavior that has been rated as commensurate with that cognitive ability. So we use rating scales mostly to obtain adaptive behavior ratings for students. And generally, they need to fall about in that 70 range, or depending on where the student is, if they're lower than that. But what DESI has decided to do is beef that up and now say that your adaptive behavior scores also need to be at 70 or below. So, and we need to have at least two of those scores, two of those composite scores, from two individuals that are familiar with the student, including the parent when possible. This really,
Please go ahead.
this really is not going to be a significant impact for SSD. We regularly provide rating scales to a variety of individuals, in addition to parents. Parents are the default person that we give those rating scales to. Additional caregivers, whether they be grandparents or a daycare provider, and in addition to the student teachers that are familiar with them. So that really is not going to be a big change for us. You know, the bigger change will be for our staff in obtaining those scores that, you know, are lower, and it might be, you know, a challenge to try and establish that criteria, but, you know, that's the rule, and it's in place so that we're not going to appropriately identify students over-identify. Yeah.
My question was, the language says significant discrepancy. That's from DESI. Is that, where is that language?
Yes, that's coming from DESI.
So we have to be a bit careful about that, because that looks more like the language for determining things like learning disorders, where there is a discrepancy between your function and your IQ score. You don't want to have a discrepancy between your function and your IQ score here. You want to have a concordance. So just need to clarify that. Otherwise, we're sort of using a definition that is at odds. In other words, the implication there is you might have a high IQ and adaptive function.
Yes, the significant discrepancy needs to be, they're defining significant discrepancy as 2 standard deviations below the mean of the assessment.
And what is the assessment of the IQ test?
Well, there's IQ tests, and we also have adaptive behavior rating scales. They're commonly used to measure adaptive behavior. And those usually have a mean of 100.
But those shouldn't discrepant from one another. They should be discrepant from the average.
Correct. In fact, the IQ score and the adaptive score should be consistent with each other.
So what I'm saying is,
So for instance, you might have a student who has a measured cognitive ability of, say, 68. We would expect that they would also, in order to meet the criteria, they would also have adaptive behavior rating scores of 68 or below.
so this is the mean composite score of the assessment.
Correct.
For a population, not for that child.
Correct.
Sorry.
My
My
problem,
attempt to simplify, I might have complicated.
my problem is, with the IQ scores we have now,
Yes.
and the standard of the art of measurement and all that, that's pretty accurate. I don't find that in rating scales. I find rating scales much more fluid, much less reliable, and therefore not much less valid. It's the adaptability scales are the ones that I find problematic. And I guess, so did DSM-5, because they found them not valid or reliable. Just wondering, what scales do you use?
Well, they are, I'll address a couple things that you mentioned. They are subject to subjectivity. I mean, we're having parents complete them who are, maybe not always the most objective raters of their own children.
At least you got two adults. I mean, you got people besides the.
Oh, we do more, and even more.
We do
I
more.
mean, there are times where we've got 5, 6, 7, 8 rating scales. So we're trying to get the consensus of a larger group of people that we're all kind of falling in the same area with our scores. And using adaptive rating scales, the Vineland is a commonly used assessment. The adaptive behavior rating system, it's been a while since I was like, but the ABAS is another one, and there's probably more out there that I'm no longer familiar with. But, we always are making sure that we are using the latest versions of our test instruments. We've always been really good at FSD about making sure we're using current assessments to use. And the idea is really to, like I said, to make sure that we're getting a lot of raters so we can all see kind of, are the scores all falling roughly in the same area. And it really is the standard in identifying intellectual disability in public schools is to use cognitive assessments, adaptive behavior rating skills.
I just find that the behavior skills are much less accurate.
Definitely subject to subjectivity, for sure. Are there any other questions? Okay. The other change to that eligibility criteria was that DESE is wanting a more robust description of the adverse educational impact caused by the disability that's based on a comprehensive evaluation that includes observations. Again, we are already doing comprehensive evaluations. We have a protocol for our school psychologists to follow when they might be discussing an intellectual disability. And observations are a standard part of nearly every evaluation that we do. So that, again, is not a change for our practice here. I suspect there's districts out there that are not doing that, and that's how these things wind up in the state plan. With regard to other health impairment, the only change there, other health impairment is our disability category for students who might have some kind of medical condition that causes limited strength, vitality, and alertness. ADHD certainly is a common medical condition that falls under there, but it could be students who have diabetes or epilepsy or any other kind of medical condition. And with that eligibility criteria, DESE also is wanting us to have a more robust description of the adverse educational impact caused by the disability. And again, that's a standard part of our conclusion in our evaluation report. We have already had that in our evaluation report, so I really don't see this as being a change for our staff. And again, I'm really just kind of reiterating, they also have added an additional requirement for eligibility determination evaluation reports, clarifying the language that we need to have a description about how the disability adversely affects learning. Again, already a component of our existing evaluation report. Next slide, please. The other substantial changes were the addition of some personnel standards. With regard to paraprofessionals, they have added a little bit of language. It's not extensive. It says that paraprofessionals now can practice and support the skills and behaviors that our teachers and other professionals are already working on with students based on their IEP goals. So over time, there's been a little bit of a concern that, how much can paraprofessionals provide, how much support or instruction can they really do? And, a few years ago, they were wanting to say, you can't even leave this person, to work by themselves with students. So the pendulum is kind of swinging a little bit, and they're saying, no, certainly, paraprofessionals can practice those skills. They can support those skills that we're working on with our IEP goals. Probably the most significant changes to the personnel standards are the addition of some new positions. They have added position for an assistant behavior analyst, which is a bachelor's degree level position, a behavior analyst position, which is a master's level degree, and a registered behavior technician. Again, Amy would probably be a better person to go. I'm not completely familiar with what we call all of our behavior and ABA providers. However, I believe these are already what we are calling our people who are in our ABA positions of providing those services. So when we have these changes to the state plan, we are required to update our local compliance plan. And DESE kindly provides a model plan for us to adopt if we want to. Districts can create their own, but it wouldn't make sense to reinvent the wheel when they have put everything there. And by simply adopting it, we can ensure that we're compliant with what their expectations are. That's what we'll be asking for approval later. Any questions?
Thank you. Truly, where it grew. You went through and made something complex simple.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our third presentation is an update on the surplus and hauling process that we put into place to be able to document what our process is for extra materials and surplus district. Dr. Boggs is going to present that.
Thank you. Good evening, President Cuneo, President Cotroff, Dr. Keenan, and Board of Education. My name is Jeff Hogg. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. This evening, as Dr. Keenan mentioned, I'll present an updated surplus and hauling process. So over time, our buildings have accumulated large amounts of extra items, surplus items that are taking up usable educational space. And so we've identified those items, but to do something with those items, the board needs to declare these items as surplus property. We have two policies we have a policy and a regulation that define that. Policy DN and regulation DMR. Those policies are included in the back of your packet this evening. And the policy that the process that we set up mirrors that policy for consistency. Next slide, please. So the first step in the process, the principal or director will take pictures of all items, and then send those pictures with a description to our budget clerk. And in this process, we need to identify things that we purchased with federal funds, because those have to be handled certain, that money needs to be returned to a certain fund. So with those two things in place, next slide, please. The budget clerk will send pictures and descriptions of the items to our SSD principals and partner district directors. The reason for this is we really want to make available items that may be in one building that aren't being used anymore, that can be used in a different part of the district. So we want to reuse our items as much as possible. So for a 2-week window or a 10-day window, those items will be available to other principals and other directors. To claim those, it's on a first-come, first-served basis, and they'll just notify the budget clerk. At that point, the budget clerk will then go ahead and put in a hauling request and move it from one building to the next, as opposed to moving it from one building to the distribution center, from the distribution center to the other. So that'll eliminate some inefficiencies with that. Next slide, please. And so then if there are items that are not claimed in that 10-day period, that's what we'll bring to the board for surplus. Next slide, please. And so once the board votes on them, as you will tonight, there's some consent agenda. The items will then be declared surplus. we will advertise the description of the picture on GovDeals that can be purchased by anybody. So anybody in the district, anybody around the country, they have access to those. Any item purchased on GovDeals will then be directly picked up from the building, again, eliminating unnecessary hauling. Next slide, please. And so if the items purchased, or if the items aren't purchased, two things will happen at this point. Either it will be designated as trash or recycling and thrown away directly on the site. And what that might be is, that might be something that we were just gonna sell for parts, or something that, maybe a little bit broken, we don't use it anymore, maybe rusted out, something along those lines. But we want to follow that process and have it declared surplus anyway, so that we're covered. If it is not declared trash or surplus, what'll happen is we'll haul that back to the distribution center for one of two things to happen there. It can either be sold later on, we may have a sale in the fall, if we have enough items brought back that we're not using. Or what it does, and this just happened today, is a school will call the distribution center and request, for example, it was 3 swivel chairs. They didn't have them, but we knew that a place did, and so we were able to move those in the district. So we just really want to streamline and make this a good process. Next slide, please. And then the final step will be, at the end of this, the budget clerk who's been tracking this entire process will inform a materials analyst, one of our accountants, of the final location for that item. Either it was trashed, recycled, or reused. Next slide, please. So what this does is it provides a process for our schools to reclaim usable educational space or reuse items that we've already purchased. And it's a better process for tracking inventory. Next slide. We're more than happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, good. Just the timeline on this, did you say that the principals have already started taking pictures, or that they have, or you go today and then they start taking?
No, this process is already in place.
Okay.
And so they had the opportunity to, you'll see this evening in your packet that there's, the first surplus. So they've already started this process. One principal tried this in July. We weren't able to bring it to the board, but we went ahead and moved those items, because the whole process was to get the items out of the building so they could reuse those rooms. So, but yes, it's ongoing.
And we wanted to make sure that you were aware of the process, so that when you're approving these things, what are we approving here? So what they're done. And it does coincide with, and it follows our policy.
My question was, in so much that we are selling these items or we're discarding these items, is it still available for nonprofit organizations, 501, that have 501c3s? If they qualify, if they're looking for items to be able to fulfill their particular office needs or other kinds of needs, to be able to have access to this?
Yeah, once we declare it surplus and it goes on GovDeals, they can either bid on that, or if they request it, we have that option, and there's some law that I need to go back and look at to get the finality of, but we will have that option for them to use as well.
So you mentioned about purchasing, because usually in situations like this with other companies, they can write off the value, but if it in turn is donated to those organizations, then whatever that value is becomes a wash in reference to writing off the fact that that was the value of what they gave to that organization.
Yeah, I think when you're talking taxes there, and thus being tax exempt, we're not in that boat. So we can make those donations, we can work with our partners, our schools around here, other organizations. But this just kind of sets the process for us to put a system into place so that people can't come back and say you're just throwing items away. So it gives us that on the back.
So speaking of that concern, I was looking through that list of surplus items, and there were things like smart boards and big giant race boards. Are we sure we don't need those, or that we won't need them next year? Because like a smart board to me, I assume it's a big budget item.
It is, but it's, as technology advances and we're replacing those with other boards, we're probably not going to go back to that. So what we can do is recoup some money on the back end, and follow this process so that it doesn't look like we are just throwing this away. My guess is with some of that stuff, a lot of the technology is recycled. We may hang on to, that may be something deemed as reusable that
that we take back to the distribution center and hold on for a little bit in case. I'm thinking some of the bigger ticket items, the furniture, chairs, we'll hold on for a little bit if it doesn't sell.
I thought your presentation was very clean. Could you, I've had a chance to look at our procedure on this. Our procedure isn't to, doesn't address every one of the things that you talked about. And what I was hoping we could do is, in one of the policy meetings, you bring your presentation, we align it with all the steps here, and we put it as a reg. And the policy doesn't have to be changed, and the reg is really up to the superintendent, But I just was hoping we could get it all. The presentation, having a line with that.
Yeah, his process is a little bit more detailed than what the
Yeah,
regulation
that's
does, so we can define that in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we could just change it. It would be real easy to change the reg.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, and we have our final presentation tonight. This will be with Chief Amy Schechter, for Human Resources, and she's going to talk to us about the proposed COVID-19 and vaccine program.
Good evening, Dr. Kimio, Dr. Keenan, the Assistant Board Director, and Dr. Keenan indicated, I'm Amy Schechter, the Chief Human Resources Officer. I'm going to speak with you this evening about COVID-19 leave and vaccines. The district leadership team and Dr. Keenan have spent an inordinate amount of time in meetings, conversations, and collaboration to come up with a proposal to address the COVID-19 absences that are occurring within the district. And so I wanted to talk about the plan. Always, anytime that we address a plan like this, the health and safety of the students and staff in the district are their top priority. And we really want to ensure that our schools remain safe and that we're able to stay open and provide in-person instruction, especially to the students that we serve here at special school districts. Everyone, the CDC and other organizations definitely point to that vaccination is the best way to back down the spread of COVID-19, especially with the recent surge of the variant that is sweeping across the country. And we really want to maximize use of all tools that we have readily available in order to keep our students safe and keep our staff safe. Next slide. So really, the background, obviously, COVID-19 has been surging, and we have had peaks and valleys, and currently, as I indicated, we are dealing with a new variant, and it's not predicted to be the last of the variants. As of April 9th, all residents who are adults in the state of Missouri have been eligible to receive a vaccine. And a few short days later, on April 12th, all Illinois residents became eligible to receive that vaccine. Another key factor to consider in the background of this is that the board did approve last year temporary COVID policies that allowed for COVID leaves of absences in GBBDB, and then non-paid leaves of absences for child care in GBBDB. Both of those policies were written with an expiration date of June 30th. Next slide. So, potential implications of what we'll be asking the board to do is that many of the students that we currently serve are not eligible to receive a vaccine. Students under the age of 12 are not eligible for a vaccine. That encompasses all students in early childhood, elementary programs, as well as some middle school programs. We also serve quite a few students in the district that have some very significant medical concerns or are immune compromised. And many of our staff work in close proximity with those students and with their colleagues in order to provide best quality education and services, keeping in mind that we have many one-on-one nurses as well as language pathologists, occupational therapists that literally physically interact with students in order to provide those services. Considering all of those things, if our staff remain unvaccinated, this is going to cause a significant staffing issue for us. Not only the staffing issue, though, but looking at the health and safety of our staff, being able to provide that in-person quality education. So on these decisions are not made within a bubble here at the district office. Dr. Keenan had the opportunity to meet with our SDNEA, which represents our teacher level staff, and our SDEA, represents our paraprofessional level staff in the district, as well as there's been much consultation with staff in the district. There was a meeting held with all district administrators last week. Obviously, there's been constant consultation with healthcare professionals that provide services to the district, as well as with our district legal counsel to decide cases with their law. So you'll see later this evening a few motions related to this information. The first being a motion to approve vaccine requirements for all special school district staff and employees. And that will be that all staff will be required to submit proof of their vaccination to the district on or before October 1st. Obviously, any time that there are mandates, there are laws under the ADA and the EEOC that allow for medical or religious exemption, and we will definitely implement processes in order to meet those accommodations if they meet criteria at all. After October 1st, staff who choose to remain unvaccinated will still be employed with the district. This is not a requirement for employment. This is a requirement to be able to access the second thing that the board will be asked to vote on this evening, and that would be the policy GBBDP that covers COVID-19 vaccines. So the only exception to that would be if you are unvaccinated and you are diagnosed with COVID, we would still allow staff to take the 10 days of COVID only if that is documented by a licensed healthcare provider. And then speaking of policy GBBDB, we're asked the board this evening to reinstate that policy and allow staff who are vaccinated to not have to take their PTO time in order to quarantine. But also, like I indicated, reinstate that COVID illness leave for staff who unfortunately are diagnosed with COVID and are very ill to be out. And then, of course, as was mentioned before, staff who choose to remain unvaccinated will still be employed with the district. However, they won't have access to those provisions of the policy to quarantine and will be required to take their own PTO.
Several questions.
Okay.
Part of this is, of course, there's been a lot of discussion, and I had one-on-one discussion with the team before the meeting, and I think in the interest of transparency, we should talk about some other things that were considered, because I think it would be. So one thing that was discussed was the possibility of requiring, I think, a weekly COVID testing in lieu of vaccination as a condition of employment. Decided not to do that, or at least not to present that as an option for the board. So you could discuss that. This is a big difference. My employer, if you're either COVID vaccinated by something in October, or you have is a condition for employment. So something we talked about and decided to get. You might just kind of talk a little bit about what.
So when we looked at the pros and cons around adding that caveat of if you're unvaccinated, one of the conditions for you to continue to be employed would be to take weekly COVID tests. And other districts are requiring that. And our SSD employees who are part of those districts will be have for part of their employment will have to to be in those districts will have to adhere to that. However, we felt from the SSD schools, which we were voting on, in particular, and also with all of our SSD staff, we felt like taking the COVID test really wasn't going to impact whether, for what the purpose of that was. So it's like if they test positive on the COVID test once a week, if somebody does, we know that we can quarantine them and make sure that we'll take care of them, and we hope that they're safe. However, we didn't want to give it as a false positive, because if you were there, or if you take the test on Monday and then all of a sudden on Thursday you might have some symptoms, you just disregard it because you don't think it's because you had a negative test on Monday. So we just felt that it wasn't going to be really impactful in terms of the day-to-day pieces. We've been adhering to making sure our staff are masking up staying safe. If you have any symptoms, stay home. Social distancing, we've been adhering to all of those pieces, so we felt that the requirement for that was much more of an administrative process, that we really didn't feel that there was a whole lot of benefit in safety for the employee perspective. That's when we considered that.
One more question. Why not just make it a condition of employment?
Right now, we're looking at some different options around that. We feel it's very important to keep our staff and students safe. We are looking at, where do we want to make sure we can see how many of our staff are actually vaccinated by proving that, the vaccination, and we feel like giving them the option around, the coverage around if you have to quarantine, that we're going to cover your PTO time. We felt that was a little bit more, supportive of keeping schools open. However, we want to make sure that we are continuing to assess it. So this is one step, and we're going to continue to look at, because as you all know, that Pfizer was approved yesterday by the FDA. So as we look at that, we feel like we can continue to evolve with this. But we thought this is one first step to adhere with our policy, to make sure that we are covering people there is a benefit for people who are receiving the vaccine. And so that we'll cover them through their personal time off.
Thank you. I know, I just wanted to make sure that was covered.
Yep.
There's been a lot of discussion about this.
Yeah.
It's a thoughtful.
Exactly. And we want to continue. We're going to continue to monitor this. I think this is one step, like I said, with the board. We'll keep updating the board, keep you all informed on it. But we're looking to see how things transpire over the next several weeks.
Just one thing, Dr. Asher. First off, I have to say personally, I really appreciate us prioritizing the health and safety of our students and our staff. I think that's our role as board members, that should be our role as advocates for SSD. For the sake of transparency, have you had conversations with our paraprofessional and teacher unions, and what is their response to this?
Yeah, we did. We met with them both of them last Thursday, had extensive conversations with them, talked about what it meant, what we considered. I will say that, when I talked in particular with the SCNEA, they're very much in support of it, because they feel like they want to make sure that they're supporting their staff to stay safe, and so that our students are also safe too. And so, talking through that, we know that there's going to be some challenges in working through when people are unvaccinated. We're going to work through with the unions on that. And also with the SEEA too, the same way. They were like, there's pros and cons with it. But I think that at the end of the day, they both understand this is about keeping the staff safe and the students safe too at the same time.
All righty. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the consensual item 6.01 to 6.17? And then Scott, you have a second on this? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Action items. Okay. Someone like to make a motion to approve 7.01, emergency approval of the temporary board policy, GBVDB, COVID-19 leave of absence.
So moved.
Before we take a vote, I just want you to know, I had Dr. Keenan check on this, because usually we have a first reading, then a second reading, and then go through everything. There is, in Missouri School Board Association, a way to have an emergency.
One of our policies.
One of our policies.
So BF policy does say that we can
do an emergency approval of something like this, so that's why it is being done. So with that in place, all in favor of 7.01? No, just aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. 7.02, Emergency approval of board policy GPDC, COVID non-paid child care leave of absence, which Amy Schechter just presented to us. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Need a motion.
I need a first.
So moved.
Okay.
Thank you. Discussion? In favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. 7.03, COVID-19 vaccination requirements for employees. Is there a motion for approval? Discussion? Yes.
Are there any protections we have that, in fact, that we were themselves adverse reaction to it? We then find ourselves with pursuit, because if there's not a law that in turn protects us in that situation. No, Pfizer signed a contract with the United States government that they couldn't be doing this, in fact, something like this would happen. How does that affect us?
They would be eligible for workers' compensation, and we would have to follow up with the workers' compensation line, so they would have to, follow that process.
When you say the workers' compensation law, is that, are you speaking about our policy, or are you speaking
Talking about the Missouri law for workers' compensation, yes. So it would be no different than if an employee is injured, on the job, if it is something that is mandated or required, and there is an adverse effect from that, that would qualify under the laws governing workers' compensation in the state of Missouri. The district would have to comply with that process.
I'll just add this. As a discussion point, so I joined this board in March of 2020. I submitted my application and ran to join the board in December of 2019, before I knew any of the storm that was coming. Since I've been on this board and had to vote about closing schools, opening them again, and all this uncertainty and real fear that people could be seriously injured or die, students, parents, teachers, staff, with these decisions. This is the first one I get to make where I really think I'm saving people and helping people. I'm just really, really.
All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Someone like to make a motion for a closed meeting of the Board of Education on August 24th and September 14th at 7 p.m.
Director Esmer, Director Byers, Director Faulkner,
Yes.
Director Hudson,
Yes.
Director Mueller,
Yes.
Vice President Petro, yes. President Cunha.
Yes. Would someone like to make a motion for approval of the draft minutes?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Following items were approved during the July 20th and August 10th executive meetings. Employment, resignations, retirements, salary adjustments, extra duty pay, and vacancy data. 5 contract releases, and 2 settlement agreements. Any board communications? Anyone?
I have one, just as a parent of a newborn freshman, after being a Littner alum, where we were taking care of like family, going in freshman year of high school, and nervous and everything, and we welcomed, not nice students, but all the students with open arms. It was a wonderful, inviting experience to go in there yesterday, even just for me to the front desk, and watch my son go off after we went to the teacher, and have 2 okay days for a brand new
All
school,
right.
you know? But the staff has been great, and I'm hoping for a great year for all our students.
I'd ask everyone to take a look at the calendar. Someone would like to make a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Let's go back.
Thank you, everybody, for the.
Thank you. Thank you for concise